sobriety is one thing and recovery is one thing, and they are separate, but they support each other. Mm-hmm. And there are men that would say they are sober, and yet I don't fully trust their sobriety because I don't know if they're in recovery. Mm-hmm. There are other men that aren't sober yet, and I see that they are in recovery, and I believe that their sobriety is going to come.
Get there. Mm-hmm.
The challenge, though, is for the spouse. If the sobriety isn't there, even if it's going to be coming in the future, if it's not there, it makes perfect sense that she is reluctant to trust and invest. Mm-hmm. And that's why this sobriety piece is so important in the relationship. If I'm asking my spouse to say with me, the best gift, the first gift that I'm able to give her is that sobriety where she can begin to trust that I am living differently.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We're back with you today with two of our most cherished members of the Faithful and True team, Susie and Russ Smidt, and of course our usual leader, Greg Miller.
Yes.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here.
Well, we're excited to have Russ and Susie with us as we continue to go through the list of things that couples do to have the husband earn back his wife's trust.
Right. For those of you that are regular listeners, we started a series. Deb and I kicked it off a while back, just talking about the different things that a husband can do, a spouse can do to rebuild trust. And again, we're specifically, because at Faithful and True, we work with men who struggle with sexual addiction. We're going to be talking about what the addict, the husband, can do to begin to build trust with his wife. And I just want to ask Susie, I'm sure working with women come in, and would you say that for most women, their first thought is, I will never trust him again?
Many women.
So is there just a process of encouragement, at the very beginning that you think is helpful?
There's a lot of encouragement at the beginning to say, let's just take that off the table. Mm-hmm. That it would be kind of absurd that you would trust right now with the timing and with where things are at. And so we have plenty of other things to work on and think about and talk about. And it's like, give yourself permission not to worry about that right now, because it isn't time.
Right. And I would think that's incredibly hopeful for a woman to be validated that it really isn't realistic or even helpful to trust too early.
Right.
That there does need to be some time and space and process to get to that place to be open to that.
And a lot of them have sat down with mentors or pastors or whoever who has said, okay, now let's forgive, or let's whatever, just right in that first meeting. And so it's a breath of fresh air for them to hear this other perspective, that there's a process.
I would also say that if a wife comes in and says, I don't think I can ever trust him again, that there can be a validation to say that may be true. You may never be able to trust him again. And what might also be true is you can. Mm-hmm. So let's just kind of be open to that possibility, even if at this point it doesn't seem possible or realistic.
Right. And the other really helpful thing is slow it down. Let's just slow things down. If we're not there, I can say, I know it's possible to trust again. And all kinds of times we just talk about, okay, we need to slow things down.
Right. Well, we're specifically talking about something that a husband can do in order to begin to rebuild trust. And we're going to be talking about maintaining sobriety, and I would say over time. So that kind of reinforces that idea that trust does take time. And so if a husband wants to present himself as trustworthy, one of the things that he's going to be able to do is to maintain his sobriety over time.
Right.
What causes that to be so significant for a wife?
Well, a lot of them have had repeated disclosures. Something happens, number of years go by, boom, here it is again. And so they really don't believe that it is at all possible. And so it's the time, but it's not just time, it's the changes in behavior that a wife sees. and the difference in how he is showing up, ways that she maybe never has seen before,
Right.
in his behaviors, in his priorities, in his the way he's using his time, that are altogether new.
Right.
And I just tell them, you get to wait, you get to sit and watch that for as long as you need to sit and watch that.
Yeah. One thing you alluded to that is a part of this, it's this maintaining sobriety over time, and that the wife is experiencing the husband as being different. Mm-hmm. That it's not just a behavioral change, but that's being supported, that's being experienced in these other changes as the man really engages recovery. So, Russ, when you're working with a man and he is struggling with sobriety, what are some of the encouragements that you're going to do in order to really help him understand the significance of this keeping sobriety in his relationship?
Well, I always remember Mark saying that the first step is to be sober. Anything after that doesn't matter. And so we talk about in group, the first rule of getting sober is that any decision you make, anything that you do, your first question should be, is this going to help my recovery? Is it going to hurt my recovery? Or is it neutral? And it's really important to view it that way so you can get some extended sobriety. The other thing we obviously see is a pattern like I had, where initially when I disclosed, it was a great weight off my back, and I felt terrific. And so it was, a problem. We always often talk about it. I was carrying this load of manure. My family's from Nebraska. Load of manure on my back, and and then I dumped it on Susie when I disclosed, and now she's in a lot of pain and struggling. Because of that kind of euphoria, of being honest for the first time, you can feel like the temptation's gone. I've had many, many men tell me, I have victory over it. I'm not tempted anymore. I think I've got this thing figured out. And I was the same way, and that, led me to a relapse a year and a half later. And for me, the relapse was related to what I promised our initial counselor. I literally walked in the door, and I don't know, even before we sat down, I said, I'm willing to do whatever you say. Whatever you tell me, I'll do. And I believed it, and I think you believed it when I said it.
It was sincere when you said it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem was that one of the things apparently she asked me to do, which apparently I
over and over
again, which I still am not sure.
No, not more than one.
Was I needed to be in some kind of recovery community, and I didn't want to do that for a variety of reasons. And so I think that's a huge part of staying sober, is being in a community of people that are also invested in staying sober. Yeah. You can be in an accountability group where it's a pat on the back group, right? Where everybody shows up and I'm not sober. Oh, you're still a good guy. We still love you. And, there's some merit to that, and that's not going to help you get sober. You need to be with like-minded men that really want to get sober.
These words here, I think, are important to highlight. He's willing to do whatever it takes to stay sober and experience life change. Mm-hmm. And those words gave me tremendous comfort. He's willing to do whatever it takes.
Right.
And he sounded really like he meant it, even though he was leaving out the safe community.
Well, one thing I would say is, for a lot of men that are beginning their own recovery journey, it's like somebody asked them to build a house. And they're going, yes, I will build a house. They want to build a house. They're committed to build a house, and yet they've never built a house before. And so when they say, yes, I'm willing to do it, I know that they actually mean it. But the problem is they don't have the tools that they need. They don't have the skill to do it. And so therefore that initial pledge seems hollow. I think one of the things that is helpful sometimes early in recovery is for a wife to understand it's not that your husband lied to you. He is committed to his recovery. The problem is he doesn't know what he doesn't know. He doesn't know what skills he doesn't have. And so therefore he gets into it and begins to realize, I don't know what I don't know or what I need. And that's when it begins to come off the rail. My guess is when you said, I will do whatever it takes, you even heard you need to go get community. You thought, I can do that. But the problem was you didn't have an understanding of what it was going to take in you to show up into the community.
Sure, I didn't know how to, like you said, I didn't know how to use my community for my sobriety. And it's certainly true that, in AA, they talk about our best thinking got us here, right? And so when we have this idea, I'm just going to read, or I'm going to watch podcasts, or I'm going to go to a conference, and I'm going to learn about this, well, you're still using your best thinking.
Right.
And one of the benefits of community is that you test your thinking against other people, preferably with other men that have had more years of sobriety under their belt, and they can challenge you on your thinking. Right. And I think that's a big part of kind of transformation.
Plus, you'd never had that type of friend relationship in your life.
No.
Well, and I would even say this community thing is huge. And so many of the men would say, yes, I'm very open to it. And like you said, maybe they don't know how to resource it when they start showing up. I think another issue is they don't understand their resistance to it. Because if we say, do you want friends? Well, everybody wants friends. But kind of like what Susie was saying, it's a different kind of experience where I show up and I'm honest and I'm transparent and I'm owning my stuff. I'm being vulnerable. For a lot of men, not only have they never experienced it before, they're not even sure how to do that. And they also don't understand their resistance to it. And so this willingness to do whatever it takes is growing in the knowledge. And so maybe the first thing is, I'm willing to learn whatever I have to learn. I'm willing to experience whatever I have to experience so that eventually I can build the house. And in the meantime, I'm going to do everything I can to change my behavior. And there will be some very specific coaching that someone can be given about, where you go, what you do, getting the support from accountability software. And I think that one of the things that is helpful is I may not have everything I need to support my sobriety initially, but I can be committed to changing my behavior immediately and then doing whatever I can do to change my behavior.
I think the words humility and teachability, if that's a word, are really important there. Because some of the stuff you're asked to do is way out in left field from it's seemingly from what we've ever done before. And
Russ,
so trusting
was it clear to you the reasons for your hesitancy to get involved with the community?
Well, sure. Part of it was my job. I was a pediatrician at the time, and I was concerned I was going to get fired, and it was embarrassing for me to consider going to be part of a group. And I was raised to do things myself and to depend upon myself.
And not talk about it.
And not talk about it. So I had all these skills that I had no knowledge about. I think part of you mentioned teachability and humility. I think part of it is showing up, being willing to show up. And I know that it was very, very difficult for me to go to my first group and show up. And I think every man that comes into group feels the same way.
Right.
There, you're walking into a group of guys you don't know. You're going to be doing some things that you've probably never done before, and it's scary.
Right.
Sometimes a mixture of excitement and dread. I know when I went to my first group, it was lots of dread, but also, could this be a good thing for me?
Right.
Too.
And one thing I would say is in working with men, and I've said this before on a podcast, sobriety is one thing and recovery is one thing, and they are separate, but they support each other. And there are men that would say they are sober, and yet I don't fully trust their sobriety because I don't know if they're in recovery. There are other men that aren't sober yet, and I see that they are in recovery, and I believe that their sobriety is going to come.
Get there.
The challenge, though, is for the spouse. If the sobriety isn't there, even if it's going to be coming in the future, if it's not there, it makes perfect sense that she is reluctant to trust and invest. And that's why this sobriety piece is so important in the relationship. If I'm asking my spouse to stay with me, the best gift, the first gift that I'm able to give her is that sobriety where she can begin to trust that I am living differently. And I think probably one of the big fears for a wife is this thought of, are we going to go through this again? Is this something that's going to be a pattern? And there's a lot of information out there that says, once he struggles with this, he will always struggle with this, that sobriety isn't possible. And one of the things that we believe that we have experienced, but we teach also, is that sobriety as a long-term way of living is possible when it is when it's supported by the transformation that comes from recovery. When if recovery is becoming the person that God created you to be, when we're engaging that journey, then sobriety will be a natural consequence of that.
One of the things that was really helpful for me was the concept that there was work for me to do. And that didn't mean that I was at all to blame for any of this, right? But that there was work for me to do so that I could grieve, heal, work on the things that had hurt me. And so I could set him aside. And we had little kids at the time, and I remember saying to him, I'm going to focus on the kids and the work I have to do, and I need to watch you do your stuff.
Right. I would guess, we talked about that phrase, would be willing to do whatever he has to do to stay sober and be in recovery. So my guess is when a wife starts to hear husband's reluctance to go to group, or excuses for not making the next appointment with the therapist, or I'm not willing to include her in the recovery journey, I'm less likely to talk about it. When some of those experiential things begin to change, that's where the wife can begin to back away and really trust, is he committed to the journey? Does that make sense?
Right, and a lot of wives, they have a lot at stake, right? Their future, their safety, whatever is in, is he going to do this work? And so it's really tempting to be controlling and lay out a list for him of all he needs to do. And when a husband is doing the list himself, the wife gets to has an easier time, I think, stepping out of that controlling role.
Right. And I know that in my own journey, there have been times when Beth could make a suggestion.
Right.
But, using our language of the three hoops, from her own hoop, make an observation and then create a suggestion. And I know that that's not something that I always liked. I probably didn't respond to it well. But one of the things that helped me was believing that Beth had our best interest at mind. When part of my journey is it's kind of questioning if people are for me, if people are going to choose me. And so when I can begin to tell myself, okay, Beth is for me, Beth has what is best for me in mind, and I create that filter, and she makes a suggestion or encourages something, I'm going to hear it completely differently. Yeah, so for some couples, they get into this dynamic where the wife may make a valid suggestion from her wise woman place, but because the husband isn't grounded in his truth, he hears it as nagging or complaining or one more thing to do. And so I think one of the things that helps is when we can believe that our spouse is for us, even if they're not able to be connected with us, maybe there's some distance, but if I can really trust that my spouse is for me, I'm going to hear her encouragement from a very different perspective.
Right.
Yeah, I like the way you talked about kind of the dynamic in the relationship and the fact that that's going to be the hardest place to demonstrate change at the beginning. And it takes a lot of practice with other men. And so if you, for instance, one change that we see in guys that are transforming is, they start to be able to identify and express feelings. For a lot of us, that was really hard to do. It's hardest to do to our spouse. It's easier to do to other men. And part of that, practicing with other men, it's super important that the men in your group are for you and for your marriage and for your wife. We have experienced guys that have been in groups that tell a lot of wife jokes or, really kind of are just hearing boards. Man, she really was terrible to you. I don't think those groups are helpful. I think what you're looking for is somebody that can say, I hear how that would be hard for you, and, nice job for trying, even though you did not as good a job as you wanted to do. You didn't show up quite like. The other thing can I say one more thing? The other thing we see a lot of is going from defensiveness and deflection to owning. And that's a real important change where we start taking responsibility for our actions, not just sexually, but in all areas of our life. And even if you just look at those two changes, you're offering your wife emotions that you're feeling. You're offering to own things that usually you'd be defensive about. That's a really big change, and that's an indication that you are starting to change. You are starting to get better at it. But initially, you practice with other guys first.
Right. Well, and I think that's one of the things that, again, back to this idea that I am learning a brand new skill. I'm learning a brand new way to live, to relate. And I often tell men that if you're going to choose recovery, every part of your life is going to recover. And so I think one of the things that can be challenging for wives in the beginning is a husband is really working on sexual sobriety and can say with confidence and truth, I am sexually sober. However, the wife is still experiencing him being short-tempered or the overcommitted to work or watching too much TV. And so it becomes complicated because the wife maybe does trust that he is sexually sober, but he's not showing up as that healthy, wise man in other areas.
Right.
And so to just be able to acknowledge that, One of my coping strategies is TV. I often talk about that. And I know early in recovery and even now, if I'm overinvested in TV, that's kind of a warning light for Beth. Not that I'm being sexually I've lost my sexual sobriety, but I'm not living as a healthy, wise man. That's why, that idea of experiencing somebody as being different in a holistic way is an important part of this rebuilding trust.
Well, when we work a lot, we talk a lot with the wives about how everything can't change all at once. And so I was, in my experience, super helpful to have a trusted voice in my life who could say, right now, he's committed to counseling. He's joined a group. He's that's good for now, right? That's encouraging because I didn't feel encouraged yet. I liked the fact that he was doing that, but there was so much more.
Right.
That so I think it's helpful to have that perspective of these are good building blocks of a program.
Right. And it's a reminder if he's never been in a group before, if he's never been invested in a community, it may seem like a simple step, but the reality is that is a huge step for someone to begin to invest in that way.
Right.
If he's never spent money on his emotional and mental health, and now he's paying for the group experience or paying to go to see a therapist, that is a literal investment in his well-being. That is a shift that is occurring. And so whatever, it's not overcompensating for what is being done. It's simply acknowledging when there is something being done that can be an indicator of future change.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that this is an addiction and it's going to require a major change in every single part of your life because your addiction affects every single part of your life. And if guys view their recovery work as just another basket of things to do or a checklist to fill, they're going to struggle. Every part about your recovery has to be affected, and that includes if you're adding something in, something has to be taken out. That's going to be where you spend your money. If everybody has limited resources, it's where you spend your time. It might be that you have to give up something that you really enjoy that's fun in order to do this work for a time, for a season. There's no way to just do this as kind of on the side. Right. I mean, this is a fundamental shift in every part of the way you think and feel and express yourself and your priorities, and it just has to be everything. And the guys that, think I can keep doing all my social stuff over here and all my work stuff and I don't have to change anything, I'm just going to add in this recovery somehow. We don't see that as being effective.
Would you say, Susie, there are times where you work with a woman and she's excited about recovery, she's excited about the transformation, and yet maybe she struggles with the amount of time or energy that it takes, that he is now going to maybe 2 meetings a week, or he is seeing that therapist that's taking money out of the vacation budget. And so can there be kind of a conflict within a person
Sure.
of, I'm glad they're doing this, and I'm now aware that it's coming at a cost, and I'm part of the person that's having to pay the cost.
Well, and pretty often she's been lonely in the addiction. And so he hasn't been that present. She's done life kind of independent on her own, and now she can be happy that, you know, he's getting into this, but it feels the same to her.
Right.
And so she's still lonely as he's doing all this work. So we talk about seasons. You know, this is a season of intense work, and it's going to pay off. And, you know, this isn't going to feel like this forever.
Right.
And I think that helps, because you kind of feel like, well, now, you know, we're in this new thing, but it feels terrible too.
Yeah, I think that's a great awareness that in the early days of recovery, when someone is choosing it, not only is there not an immediate change, it can also feel very similar to the way that it's been historically. And so it's important that as the man, we're checking in and including our spouse in what's going on to the extent that she wants to be included. You know, I do hear stories where a guy will say, my wife has told me she doesn't want to know anything about my recovery. And we'll say, well, if that's the boundary, you need to honor that boundary. And maybe there will come a time where she will want to hear more about what's going on.
I would say the majority of wives I work with do want to know.
Do want to know.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that we talk to the men about is this idea of this can't just be about a checklist. You kind of alluded to that, where I create a checklist. In fact, at the last workshop, I had a man say, tell me what to do. And I said, well, the challenge is this isn't about what we do, this is how we be. You know, it's that phrase I use, we don't do recovery, we be in recovery. And being takes more energy and effort and I think internal transformation than doing. Many of the men who come to Faithful and True are workaholics. They have a work addiction. So you tell them what to do, there's a part of them that can jump on board because they love doing stuff. And so there's even a caution early on, start this about being, not just about doing. The doing is important, but it's how you're showing up in the being. And using our language here of the survivor and the wise man, if the wise man goes to a recovery experience, he's going to be present, he's going to be transformed, he's going to experience it. If a survivor man shows up at something, he's just going to do it. And I know that for some wives, the husband is doing the right things and has the checklist of all the things maybe she's even asked to do, and she's not experiencing him as different. And that may be that transition of it can't just to be a checklist of what you do, it has to be about how you be in recovery, means how I'm going to be in my relationships.
I think that really speaks to motivation. You know, I think that's really, I think most of addicts, when their primary motivation is to avoid conflict and avoid pain. And as you get into recovery, if you're just checking boxes and saying, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm reading this and so forth, but your motivation is still to avoid conflict, you're never going to be able to have any connection, right? It happens all the time. Guys will say, well, I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and I still have, we still get in these big fights. What's going on? Well, the motivation has to be, are you going to be this kind of new person? And out of that desire, out of that motivation to be a new person, you are doing those steps. But the motivation isn't to avoid conflict. In fact, it's the opposite. It's to get to a point where you're able to engage with somebody in conflict and be present and not have your shame triggered and not have your immediately go into your survivor place. You can stay in your wise man place. And so, I think you hear that all the time as guys will come in and say, well, I did what you said, or I did what the, workbook said, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
Right. She
got mad.
She got mad anyway. And so you have to kind of rephrase it the way you're saying. What, is your motivation just to have your life without conflict, or is your motivation to be the man that God created you to be, free from the shackles that this addiction places you into?
Okay, great.
Well, that is a great comment to end on
Yes.
for today. We really appreciated having both of you with us on the podcast today.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And in fact, those who are listening and are loyal listeners to the podcast, we invite you to keep watching, because we're going to have Russ and Susie back with us for a follow-up to this as we continue to find the various ways that couples can work to regain trust in their relationship. If this podcast has opened your eyes to the possibility that you would like to get some additional help for your circumstances, we invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources and information about our Men's Journey Workshop, which we offer every month, and also for the couples and spouses workshops. We have the women's workshop coming up in January, and we still have room in that event. And then in February, we have our next couples workshop. So check that out at faithfulandtrue.com. In the meantime, we hope that this coming week will be a week that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.